I am here to marry you." Clara Whitmore stared at the stranger standing in her doorway, tall, trail-worn, a battered suitcase at his feet, and felt the blood drain from her face. She had written that letter 14 months ago. On a night so cold and lonely, she had convinced herself no one would ever answer. She had nearly forgotten it existed, but this man had not forgotten. He had crossed 2,000 miles of open country to stand on her porch and say those 6 words out loud, and Clara had no idea what to do with him. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to our channel and follow every twist to the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Clara did not move. She stood in the doorframe with a dish towel still in her hands, flour dusted across her wrists, and stared at the man on her porch as though he had materialized from a dream she could not remember having. The late afternoon sun was already dropping behind the ridge. November had its teeth out. The wind coming off the valley carried the first real cold of the season, and this man, this stranger, was standing in it without a coat heavy enough to matter, looking at her like he had been thinking about this exact moment for a very long time. "I don't know you," Clara said. "No, ma'am," the man agreed. "Not yet." He had a steady voice, calm, the kind of voice that had learned to stay quiet when it wanted to shout. He reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out an envelope, worn at the corners, folded once down the center, and held it out toward her. Clara did not take it. She already recognized it. She recognized the envelope because she had addressed it herself, 14 months ago. On a night in September, when the house had been so quiet, she had sat at the kitchen table for an hour, listening to the clock tick before she picked up a pen. "That is my letter," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I wrote that letter over a year ago." "Yes, ma'am, I know." "And I never—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I did not expect anyone to actually come." The man lowered the envelope slowly and tucked it back into his pocket. He did not look offended. He did not look desperate. He looked like a man who had prepared himself for exactly this reaction, who had rehearsed for it somewhere out on the road, and who had decided before he ever knocked on the door that he was going to be patient no matter what she said. "My name is Elias Carter," he said. "I was a carpenter in Ohio. I had a shop, a house, and a life I had built with my hands. And then I lost most of it, not at once but slowly, the way things tend to go when you stop paying attention to what matters." He paused. "I read your letter in a shared newspaper at a boarding house in Columbus. It had been passed around so many times the edges were soft. Someone had circled your words with a pencil." He looked at her directly. "I don't know who circled them, but I read them, and I read them again. And I think I read them every day for a month before I finally understood why I couldn't put them down." Clara gripped the door towel tighter. "What did you understand?" she asked before she could stop herself. "That you weren't asking for rescue," Elias said. "That's what every other letter in that paper was asking for in different words. But yours wasn't. You said life was easier when 2 people carried the weight together. That's not rescue. That's partnership." He picked up his suitcase. "That's the only kind of arrangement I was ever willing to make." Clara looked at the suitcase. It was not a large one, canvas-sided, worn at the base, the kind of bag a man packed when he was not planning to come back from where he was going. The kind of bag that meant he had already made the decision before he bought the stagecoach ticket. "You sold your shop?" she asked. "I did." "Your house?" "Rented it to my cousin. He needed a place." "And you came all the way to Montana Territory on the strength of one letter." "I came all the way to Montana Territory," Elias said quietly, "because I was 41 years old, and I had spent 4 years pretending that working 16 hours a day meant I didn't need anything else. And one night, I read your letter, and I realized that neither of us believed that anymore." The wind pushed past him into the house. Clara felt it on her ankles. She should have sent him away. Every practical instinct she possessed told her to send him away. She did not know this man. She had not prepared for him. She had no plan, no arrangement, no legal agreement, nothing in place that would make any of this sensible or safe or even vaguely appropriate by the standards of decent society in 1887. But she also looked at him and saw something she had not seen in a very long time. Someone who told the truth when it cost him something. "There is a guest cabin behind the house," she said. "The latch sticks, but the stove works. I'll bring supper at 6. Elias blinked. It was the first time since he'd knocked that he looked genuinely surprised. "I'm not offering anything else," Clara said quickly. "No promises, no arrangement. No marriage, not tonight, not until I know more than your name and the size of your suitcase. You understand me?" "Completely," Elias said. "And if I decide in a week that this was a mistake, you'll leave without argument." "Yes, ma'am." "And you will not tell a single person in town why you're here." A pause. "What do I tell them?" "Tell them you're a carpenter looking for work. That's true enough." Something moved across Elias Carter's face then. It wasn't quite a smile. It was more like the expression a man gets when something he was not expecting turns out to be exactly right. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he walked around the side of the house to find the cabin. Clara stood in the doorframe for another full minute after he disappeared. Then she went inside, closed the door, and stood in the middle of her kitchen with her hands on the edge of the table and told herself very firmly that she had not just made the biggest mistake of her life. She was not entirely sure she believed it. Oink. Supper was simple. Salt pork, boiled potatoes, cornbread that had come out slightly too dark on the bottom because she had been too distracted to watch the oven. She carried it to the cabin on a tin tray knocked twice and left it on the step without waiting for the door to open. She went back inside and sat at her kitchen table and ate alone, as she had eaten every night for 4 years. The chair across from her was empty. It had been empty since Daniel died in the spring of 1883, when a lung sickness that the doctor kept calling manageable turned out to be less manageable than anyone believed. She had known something was wrong in January. By April, he was gone. She had not moved the chair in 4 years, and she was not entirely sure why, whether it was grief or stubbornness, or the half-formed superstition that moving it would mean admitting something she still was not ready to admit. Clara picked at her cornbread and tried not to think about the man in the cabin. She failed. She thought about his voice, about the way he had held out that letter with both hands, as if it were something that belonged to her, and he was simply returning it. About the way he had described her words not as an advertisement, not as a transaction, but as something he had read and read again until he understood them. She had written that letter in 9 minutes. She had been embarrassed by it the moment she dropped it in the mail. She had told herself for 14 months that no one had answered because it was exactly as desperate and embarrassing as it had felt. She had been wrong. Someone had answered. He was 20 feet behind her house, eating salt pork by a wood stove that needed a new door hinge, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with him. Clara pushed her plate away and reached for the small wooden box she kept on the shelf above the kitchen window. She did not open it often. Inside was a short stack of papers, Daniel's handwriting on the top 2, her mother's letter from Pennsylvania, the deed to the ranch, and at the very bottom, the duplicate copy of the letter she had sent to the marriage agency. She lifted it out and read it. "I own a small ranch in Montana Territory, 140 acres, most of it workable. I have run it alone for 3 years. I am good at the things I have needed to learn, and I am still learning the things I have not. I am not a young woman in the way that most advertisements seem to prefer. I am 30 years old. I have known love, and I have known loss, and I do not believe the two things cancel each other out. I am looking for someone who understands that life becomes possible again when two people are willing to carry the difficulty of it together. I do not need to be saved. I do not need to be kept. I need a partner, someone who works, who is honest, who is not afraid of the kind of silence that builds between two people who are learning to trust each other." She folded it again. She had forgotten that last line. She had written it quickly, feeling slightly ridiculous, and she had apparently forgotten it in the months since. Someone who is not afraid of the kind of silence that builds between two people who are learning to trust each other. Elias Carter, had come 2,000 miles on the strength of that. Clara put the letter back in the box. She did not sleep well that night. She was out before dawn, as she always was. The livestock needed feeding first. The horses, the 3 milk cows, the dozen chickens that had survived the previous winter. Then water. Then the fence on the eastern boundary that had needed repair for the better part of 3 weeks, and that she kept telling herself she would get to when she had a spare hour, which she never seemed to have. She was halfway to the barn when she stopped. The light from the cabin was already on. She could see it through the single small window, the warm amber glow of a lantern, not the pale blue of first light through glass. He was already up, already awake. In a strange cabin on the first night of being nowhere at all, Elias Carter was already awake before sunrise. Clara went to the barn. She had finished feeding the horses and was halfway through the grain for the cows when she heard the cabin door open. She did not look up. She heard footsteps, even unhurried, not asking permission, cross the yard, stop at the barn entrance, and then come inside. "What needs doing?" Elias asked. Clara kept her eyes on the feed bucket. "I don't know you well enough to trust you with my livestock," she said. "Fair," Elias said. "What can I do that doesn't involve your livestock?" The fence on the eastern boundary. Third post from the corner is sunk 6 inches, the wires loose from there to the tree line. Tools. Shed beside the barn, post hammer wire stretcher, and a coil of fencing wire on the left wall. I'll need to know which direction east is. Sun comes up behind the ridge. Walk toward it. A pause. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She heard him go to the shed. She heard him rummaging, not carelessly, but with the efficiency of someone who understood where tools lived and what they were for. She heard the shed door close. She heard his footsteps cross the yard again and head toward the ridge. She finally looked up. He was already 50 yards away, the post hammer in one hand, the coil of wire over his shoulder, walking toward the growing light. Clara stood in her barn with a feed bucket in her hands and thought he did not ask what time breakfast was. He did not ask what he would be paid. He did not stand in the doorway making conversation to establish himself as someone worth tolerating. He simply asked what needed doing, and then he went and did it. By noon, she had found 3 more things that needed doing. The hinges on the north pasture gate had rusted to the point where the gate dragged 3 inches in the mud when she opened it. The water trough in the south paddock had developed a slow leak she had been managing with extra buckets for 6 weeks. And the roof of the chicken coop had a section of warped shingles that she knew were going to cause problems the first time a serious rain hit. She told herself she was making a mental list for her own reference. She did not tell herself she was wondering whether he would notice any of them on his own. He noticed all 3. He came back from the fence line at midday with mud on his boots and a question about where she kept the spare hinges. She pointed him to the supply shelf in the barn. He came back again an hour later, asking if she had roofing nails or if she needed to send to town for them. She found a partial box behind the woodpile. He came back at 4 o'clock with a quieter voice than the first 2 times, and asked if she would mind showing him where the water main ran under the south paddock, because he wanted to understand the layout of the system before he tried to fix what was broken. That stopped her. "You want to understand the layout before you fix it," she said. "I don't like guessing at things I can learn," Elias said. "I've broken more things by guessing than by taking 5 extra minutes." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "That's a sensible way to work," she said. "My father taught me that. Took me 15 years to actually believe it." They walked the south paddock together. She explained the water system, where the main line entered where it branched, which sections she had laid herself the second summer after Daniel died, and which sections Daniel had put in originally. Elias listened without interrupting. He crouched down at the trough, examined the seam pressed on it in 2 places, and said he could fix it before supper if she had a square of tin and some solder. "I have tin," she said. "No solder. I brought some. It was in the kit I packed in the bottom of the suitcase." Clara looked at him. "You brought Salter from Ohio?" she asked. "I'm a carpenter who can't saw wood without a saw," Elias said simply. "I didn't know what shape things would be in when I arrived. I packed what seemed like it might be useful." And that quiet, unassuming practical honesty was the moment Clara Whitmore felt the first faint shift of something in her chest that she did not have a name for yet. It was not attraction, not trust, not even liking exactly. It was recognition. The feeling you get when someone operates by the same logic you operate by, and you had been so certain you were doing it alone that you had stopped expecting to find it in another person. She walked back to the house. She did not turn around to see if he was watching her go, but she wondered about it all the way to the kitchen door. She brought supper to the cabin again. This time she waited when she knocked. He opened the door on the second knock, and this time she saw the inside of the cabin neat, not militarily so, but the natural order of someone who had unpacked a single suitcase with care. His tools were lined along the wall beside the door. His coat hung on the single hook. On the small table beside the stove, he had put one item from his pack, a small framed photograph face down. She noticed it. She did not ask about it. He took the tray, and instead of closing the door, he stepped back and said, "Would you like to eat here? You don't have to. I have not talked to another person in 4 days, and I find I miss it." Clara looked at the empty chair across the table. 10 minutes, she said. She came inside. They sat across from each other with their tin plates and ate for a moment in the kind of silence she had described in her letter, the silence that builds between two people who are learning to trust each other. "The fence is done," Elias said. "All of it. I found another 3 weak points past the tree line. I reinforced those too." "I didn't ask you to go past the tree line." "I know. But weak fence doesn't stop being weak just because you didn't ask about it." Clara cut a piece of salt pork and said nothing. "The gate hinges are new," he continued. "The old ones were past saving. I used the spare iron from your barn. I hope that was acceptable." It was. "The coop roof will need proper shingles to do it right. I've tacked the warped section down for now, but it won't hold a heavy snow. If you tell me which mill you use for lumber, I can have what we need by the end of the week." Clara looked up. "We," she said. Elias stopped. He met her eyes, and she watched him understand his mistake and decide deliberately not to retreat from it. "The ranch," he said. "What the ranch needs." "That's what I thought you meant," Clara said. But it was not what either of them had said. And they both knew it. In town, people noticed him within 48 hours. Harlan's Mill and Feed was not a large establishment, but it functioned as the nerve center of everything that happened in the valley, and a great deal that happened in the surrounding 50 miles. Margaret Harlan, the proprietor's wife, had a memory for faces and a talent for connecting one piece of information to another that would have made her a formidable intelligence officer in a different era and a different life. She noticed the stranger buying roofing nails and tin plate and a 5-pound sack of flour. She noticed that he signed the ledger with a practiced hand and paid in good coin. And she noticed, most importantly, that when she asked his name and his business, he said, "Elias Carter. I'm a carpenter looking for work." She did not believe that was the whole story. She mentioned it to her husband at supper. Her husband mentioned it to Bill Crane at the farrier's the following morning. Bill Crane went to school with Clara Whitmore's brother-in-law and had his own opinions about what Clara needed, which he had shared freely and unsolicited on multiple occasions. By Thursday, the valley knew that Clara Whitmore had a man staying in her guest cabin. By Friday, 2 women from the Ladies' Civic Committee had appeared at her door with sympathy and thinly veiled questions. Clara gave them coffee and cornbread and answered nothing directly, which was a skill she had developed to a considerable art form in the 4 years since Daniel died. But that Friday evening, when she walked out to the cabin with supper, Elias was already standing on the step, and she could tell from his posture that he had heard something. "Man in town asked me today how long I planned to stay," he said. Which man introduced himself as Bill Crane. Clara pressed her lips together. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wasn't sure yet, that I was getting the lay of the land." He paused. He told me that Clara Whitmore was a respectable woman who had been through a great deal and that people in this valley took a protective interest in her well-being. He said that. He said it with his arms crossed and his jaw like a fence post. Despite herself, Clara almost smiled. Bill Crane has taken a protective interest in my well-being for 4 years, without once asking what I actually wanted. That seems like a common problem, Elias said. It is. What do you want? He asked then. Not the way Bill Crane would have asked it, weighted with assumptions about what the answer should be. Just what do you want? Clara stood on the step of the cabin and held the supper tray and thought about the question honestly, which was something she did not often let herself do. I want to not feel like I'm failing at my own life, she said. I want to work hard and have that mean something. I want to stop explaining to people why I haven't remarried, as though that's a problem requiring their solution. She paused. I want to eat a meal and talk to someone who asks what I want. Elias was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. Do you want to eat inside or on the step? And Clara laughed. It was not a large laugh. It was quiet, almost surprised the laugh of someone who had not expected to be amused and found herself ambushed by it. On the step, she said. And they sat on the cabin step in the last of the November light and ate supper together for the first time. 8 days after Elias Carter arrived at the Whitmore Ranch, Clara found the photograph. She had gone to the cabin to return a borrowed wrench, knocked twice, received no answer, and let herself inside to leave it on the table. She was already turning to leave when she glanced at the small framed photograph on the side table, the one she had noticed the first night and not asked about. It was face up now. A woman, young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and an expression that was serious but warm. A studio portrait, the kind families commissioned for special occasions. Clara looked at it for longer than she intended to. She heard footsteps in the yard. She put the wrench on the table and stepped back from the photograph, and she was standing in the center of the room, looking at nothing in particular, when Elias came through the door and found her. He looked at her. He looked at the photograph. Her name was Ruth, he said. Clara met his eyes. I wasn't trying to pry. I brought the wrench back. I know. He came inside and set down the wood he'd been carrying. She died 4 years ago. Fever. It was fast, 2 weeks from the first day she was sick to the day she was gone. He looked at the photograph once, then back at Clara. I kept working for 2 years after. Like if I worked hard enough, I could fill the space she left. It doesn't work, by the way. No, Clara said quietly. It doesn't. Daniel. Lung sickness. Spring of '83. He was 32. They stood in the small cabin with that shared weight between them. Not grief exchanged, but grief recognized. Two people who had learned that surviving loss did not mean the loss became smaller. It meant you got larger around it. Learned to carry it instead of being crushed by it. I'm not trying to replace her, Elias said. I want you to know that. I'm not here because I need someone to be Ruth. I'm here because... He stopped, found the right words. I'm here because your letter made me believe that what comes after loss can still be something real, not a replacement, something new. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Go on to supper, she said finally. I'll bring it over in an hour. She left the cabin and went to the house and stood in the kitchen with her hands flat on the table and breathed through something she was not ready to name. Something new. She had not let herself think about something new in a very long time. But standing in that kitchen, in the house that had been too quiet for 4 years, she thought maybe it was possible. And for the first time since she had written that letter in 9 embarrassed minutes on a cold September night, Clara Whitmore was glad she had sent it. The knock at her door came late that same night. It was not Elias. It was Margaret Harlan, bundled in a heavy wool coat, with the specific expression of a woman who has decided she is doing something for someone's own good and has prepared her arguments in advance. I hope you'll forgive me for calling at this hour, Margaret said. But I felt it was important. Clara stepped back from the door. Come in, They sat at the kitchen table with tea that Clara made in 2 minutes flat because she needed something to do with her hands. "The valley is talking, Clara," Margaret said. "About the man in your cabin." "I know. People are asking questions. People always ask questions. This is different." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Some of the questions are unkind. You understand what I mean. There are those who are saying—" She paused. "That a woman alone on an isolated ranch taking in a stranger is not exercising good judgment." Clara wrapped her hands around her teacup. "And what are those people suggesting I should do?" she asked. "Send him away. Some, yes. And go back to managing the ranch alone, to having fence posts. I can't replace and roofs I can't reach and water systems I can't fix without losing 2 days of other work." Margaret was quiet. "Daniel left me 140 acres and 6 months of savings," Clara said. "I made this ranch work by myself for 4 years because I had no other choice. I am not complaining about that. But I am also not going to apologize for accepting help when it is offered by someone who works hard and asks nothing unreasonable in return." She met Margaret's eyes. "Elias Carter has been here 8 days. In 8 days, he has repaired 4 fences, rebuilt 2 gate hinges, patched my chicken coop, fixed a water trough leak I had been managing with extra buckets for 6 weeks, and chopped enough firewood to see me through to February. He has not once made a demand spoken to me with disrespect or given me a single reason to doubt his character." Margaret was silent for a moment. "And beyond the work?" she asked gently. Clara looked at her. "That is not the valley's business," she said. Margaret nodded slowly. She finished her tea. She stood up and put on her coat and picked up her gloves, and at the door she turned and said, "He seems decent, Clara, for what it's worth. The way he spoke to Harold in the store, careful, straightforward. Not a man performing goodness, just a man being good." "Yes," Clara said. "I've noticed that. All right." Margaret buttoned the top button of her coat. "I suppose the valley will say what it says." "It always does." "And you will do what you decide." "I always do." Margaret almost smiled. "God help anyone who tries to talk you out of something once you've made up your mind." "God has certainly tried," Clara said. And after Margaret left and the house was quiet again, Clara sat at the table alone and thought about what she had said. Not a man performing goodness, just a man being good. That was it, she thought. That was exactly it. And in the silence of the kitchen that had been too empty for 4 years, Clara Whitmore let herself feel something she had almost forgotten. The first fragile edge of something she might be willing to call hope. The morning after Margaret Harlan's visit, Clara woke up before the alarm in her chest, the one she had developed over 4 years of being solely responsible for everything, and lay still for exactly 30 seconds before she heard it. The sound of an axe. Steady, rhythmic, unhurried. The sound of someone who had been at it for a while already and intended to keep at it. She got up, she dressed, she went to the kitchen window. Elias was at the woodpile in the gray pre-dawn light, splitting logs with the methodical efficiency of a man who had decided to make himself useful before the world asked him to justify his presence. He did not know she was watching. He was not performing. He was simply working the way he worked, steady, quiet, without waste. Clara made coffee. She made enough for 2. She had not done that in 4 years. She stood at the stove and looked at the second cup and thought, "This is not a decision. This is just coffee." And she carried both cups outside and set one on the fence post nearest the woodpile and went back inside without saying a word. She heard the axe stop. She heard it start again 30 seconds later. When she came out for the morning chores, the cup was empty and back on the fence post, rinsed clean with water from the barrel. She picked it up and said nothing. But something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not in the way that stories sometimes make things shift with a sudden declaration or a moment of clarity that arrives like lightning and changes everything at once. It shifted the way the ground shifts in early spring, when the frost is coming out and the earth is softening from the inside without anyone being able to see it yet. Small, quiet, real. It was the beginning of November, and Elias Carter had been at the Whitmore ranch for 9 days. By the 10th day, they had fallen into a pattern without discussing it. He was up before her, or at the same time, she could never determine which, and he started on whatever had been left undone from the day before. She handled the livestock because the livestock was hers, and she was not yet ready to share that responsibility with someone she had not fully decided to trust. He handled the structures, the fences, the buildings, the mechanical systems, because that was what he knew, and because it was. She slowly understood how he had always demonstrated that he was somewhere he intended to stay. At noon they ate separately. She in the house, he in the cabin, or in the barn, depending on where the work had taken him. She did not know why she maintained that distance at midday, except that she needed at least one part of the daily routine that felt like her own, unchanged, to remind herself that she was still the same person she had been before he arrived. At supper, for the past 3 nights, they had sat on the cabin step. It was not discussed. It simply happened. She arrived with the tray, he opened the door before she knocked, and they sat together in the darkening air and ate and talked. They talked about small things mostly: the livestock, the weather coming in from the north, the price of lumber at Harlan's, whether the south paddock drainage would hold through a wet winter, or whether it needed to be regraded in spring. But underneath the small things, the bigger things had begun moving quietly, the way deep water moves beneath a still surface. "Tell me something about Daniel," Elias said on the 11th night. Clara was quiet for a moment. The question did not alarm her. She understood instinctively that it was not asked out of jealousy or comparison. It was asked the same way she had asked about Ruth, because understanding who a person has loved tells you more about who they are than almost anything else. "He was funny," she said. "Not in the way that performs itself. He was quietly funny. He noticed things, small, absurd things, and he would say them so matter-of-factly that it took you a moment to realize he was joking, and by the time you laughed, he was already 3 sentences ahead of you." She looked at her hands. He was also stubborn enough to be infuriating. He believed he could fix anything given enough time and effort and sheer refusal to admit failure. The lung sickness... She stopped, breathed. The lung sickness was the first thing in his life that did not respond to stubborn effort. I think that surprised him more than it frightened him. Right up to near the end, he was still making plans for the spring planting. Elias was quiet. "Ruth sang," he said. "Badly. Genuinely, committedly badly, and without a trace of self-consciousness about it. She sang while she cooked, while she swept, while she was doing anything that didn't require her full attention. And she had a voice that was..." He almost smiled. "It was the kind of voice that made birds reconsider their profession. But she sang like it was the most natural thing in the world. And after she was gone, the silence in the workshop was the hardest thing. Not the grief exactly. The quiet where the bad singing used to be." Clara looked at him. "That's the truest thing anyone has ever said to me about losing someone," she said. "The specific things," Elias said. "That's what no one tells you. You don't miss the person in the abstract. You miss the specific, irreplaceable, slightly ridiculous things." "The extra chair at the table," Clara said. "The sound of someone else breathing in the house at night." "Yes," she said, quietly. "Yes, exactly that." They sat for a while in the silence that was not empty. The silence that her letter had described. The kind that builds between 2 people who are learning each other. And Clara thought, this is what I was trying to say when I wrote that letter. This exact thing. I did not have words for it then, but this is what I meant. She went inside that night and slept without waking once. She had not done that in years. Friend. The first real test came on the 13th day. It was not dramatic. It did not arrive with warning. It arrived the way most real tests do, in the middle of an ordinary morning wearing the face of something practical. A man from town appeared at the ranch gate at 9:30. His name was Roy Decker, and he was not someone Clara had ever liked, though she had always been civil to him, because civility in a small valley was a survival strategy more than a preference. Roy Decker was a land agent who operated out of a cramped office next to the postal exchange. He dealt in ranch sales land surveys and the particular brand of cheerful predation that disguised itself as helpfulness. He had spoken to Clara twice about selling the ranch in the 2 years following Daniel's death. Both times she had declined politely, and then less politely. Both times he had told her he understood completely, and that the offer would stand whenever she reconsidered. She had not reconsidered. Now he was at her gate with his hat in his hand and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes, and behind her she heard the barn door open. Elias appeared in the yard without a word. He was carrying a fence staple and a pair of pliers, and he stood with the specific casual positioning of someone who has decided to be present for a conversation without being asked. Clara felt something she did not entirely expect relief. "Mrs. Whitmore," Roy said, "a pleasure as always. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "You are," Clara said. "What do you need, Roy?" Roy blinked at the directness. She had always been more careful before, more wrapped in the politeness the valley expected of a widow who needed to maintain good relationships. Something about Elias, standing 12 feet behind her, not threatening, just present, made her less interested in the performance of careful. "I've had an inquiry," Roy said. "A developer from back east, a serious buyer. Mrs. Whitmore, a man with real capital who is interested in the valley property, several parcels. Yours is one he's specifically identified as having significant potential." "For what?" Clara asked. "For development. Expansion. He's talking about establishing a commercial operation, a processing mill, potentially maybe more. He's prepared to offer considerably above market value. I'm talking about a number that would set you up comfortably for the rest of your life without ever needing to—" "No," Clara said. Roy stopped. "Clara, my answer has not changed, Roy. This ranch is not for sale. Not to a developer from back east, not to anyone. I understand you have sentimental attachment." "It's not sentiment," she said, and her voice came out flatter and harder than she had intended, which meant it was probably the truest she had sounded in a long time. "It is 4 years of my life. My labor, my decisions, my losses. This land was here before Daniel, and it will be here long after I've made something of it. It is not for sale." Roy's smile thinned. His eyes moved past her to Elias, still standing with the fence staple, still saying nothing. "I see you've taken on some help," Roy said. "I have." "New to the valley, is he?" "He is." "Interesting timing." A pause. "A woman alone takes on a stranger around the same time a significant purchase offer arrives. People will draw their own conclusions." And there it was. Clara had been waiting for something like it. The implied threat wrapped in neighborly concern, the suggestion that her choices were suspicious, that she could be made to feel embarrassed into cooperating. She opened her mouth. Elias spoke first. "Elias Carter," he said, stepping forward, extending his hand with the pliers still in the other one. "Carpenter out of Ohio. I've been hired to assist with the structural repairs on the property." His voice was even, not aggressive, not defensive, just, "Here are the facts," man to man, clearly stated. "I understand you're in land sales, good trade, but I think Mrs. Whitmore has given you her answer." Roy looked at Elias's hand, looked at his face, and shook the hand once. "I'm sure she has," Roy said. He put his hat back on. "The offer stands, Clara. My client is patient." "Then he'll have a long wait," Clara said. Roy left. Clara and Elias stood in the yard until the sound of his horse faded down the road. "I didn't need you to speak for me," Clara said. "You're right," Elias said. "I apologize. You had it handled. I just—" He looked at the road. "I don't like men like that." "Neither do I," Clara said. "But I've been dealing with men like that for 4 years without assistance." "I know." She looked at him. "I'm not criticizing you for it," she said carefully. "I just need you to understand that I don't need a shield." "I understand that." "And if you're going to be here if this arrangement continues, then you need to understand that my first instinct is to handle things myself, and that instinct is not stubbornness, it is how I have survived." Elias looked at her for a moment. "What if I'm not trying to be your shield?" he said. "What if I just—" He paused, chose the words honestly. What if I just wanted to stand next to you? Clara looked away. Then stand next to me, she said. Not in front. Yes, ma'am. And don't call me ma'am. A beat. Yes, Clara. And that was the first time he used her name. The snow came early that year. Not the blizzard that came later, but the first real snow arrived on a Tuesday evening in mid-November, and by morning it had put 6 inches on the ground and was still going. Clara was out before full light to clear the stock troughs and check the animals, and by the time she came back inside, Elias had already shoveled a path from the cabin to the barn and another from the barn to the house. She stood on the porch and looked at the cleared paths. He had thought ahead. He had understood that she would need to move between those 3 points all day, and that every minute spent fighting through snow was a minute taken from something else, and he had simply, without discussion, without announcement, without waiting to be asked, done the thing that needed doing. Clara stood on the porch and felt something crack open in her chest very slightly, in the way that a door cracks open when the latch sticks, but you push slowly enough that it gives without breaking. She went inside and made breakfast. For 2. You don't have to feed me 3 times a day, Elias said when he came to the kitchen door 20 minutes later and she waved him inside. I know I don't have to, she said. Sit down. He sat down. They ate breakfast at the kitchen table where the empty chair had sat across from her for 4 years, and they ate simply without ceremony. Eggs and bread and the strong coffee she made, because anything weaker felt like a waste of time. And it was so ordinary, so quietly domestic, so completely unremarkable from the outside that Clara had to be careful not to look at the empty chair too long. She moved it slightly, 6 inches to the left, enough to make room, not enough to mean anything she wasn't ready for it to mean. Elias noticed. He looked at the chair, then at her, and said nothing. That was the moment she decided she trusted him. Not because he said anything, because he understood when to say nothing. Roy Decker will come back, she said over her second cup of coffee. I know. He's been trying to buy this land for 2 years. The first time he came after Daniel died, I thought it was neighborly concern. The second time I understood what it actually was. What do you know about the developer he mentioned? Clara looked at him. It was a sharp question, not curious but analytical. The kind of question a person asks when they're already thinking 3 steps ahead. Nothing, she said. He's mentioned outside buyers before, but always vaguely. This is the first time he's specifically said developer. A processing mill, Elias said. That's what he said. That would require water access. Your southern pasture runs along the creek. Clara felt something go still inside her. Yes, she said. It does. So this isn't just about your land, Elias said. It's about your water access. Without your property, any mill operation along that creek would be difficult to establish legally. She had not thought of it that way. She had been thinking about it as a man trying to buy her out. She had not thought about why her property specifically, why this particular piece of land among all the valley ranches. How do you know about water rights and mill operations? She asked. Elias looked at his coffee cup. In Ohio, he said, a man tried to buy the building my workshop was in for the same reason. He needed the property for access to a canal. He was very friendly about it. He made a generous offer. When I declined, he became less friendly. By the time I understood the full picture, I had already been outmaneuvered in 3 different ways. He looked up. I eventually kept the building, but I lost 2 years of sleep over it first. I would have saved myself considerable trouble if I had understood what he was actually after at the start. Clara set her cup down carefully. You think Decker is coming back with something less friendly than an offer, she said. I think you should find out who this developer is and what he's actually filed with the Territorial Land Office, Elias said, before he decides to stop asking politely. The snow was still falling outside. Clara looked out the window, then back at Elias and thought he did not come to Montana to fight Roy Decker over water rights. He came to Montana with a suitcase and a carpenter's hands, and a faith built on a letter she almost forgot she had written. And yet here he was, thinking about her land like it was something worth protecting. "I'll write to the land office in Helena," she said. "I'll go to town this afternoon and find out what's in the local registry," Elias said. "Decker has to file locally first. Whatever he's planning will have a paper trail." "You'd do that?" Elias looked at her with an expression that was not quite patience and not quite frustration, but something steady and direct that was somewhere between the two. "Clara," he said, "I am standing next to you." She remembered what she had said to him the day before. "Then stand next to me, not in front." "All right," she said, and that afternoon, for the first time since he arrived, they went to town together. Harlan's mill and feed went quiet when they walked in. Not completely. The conversations did not stop. But they shifted, adjusted, became conscious of themselves in a way that conversations do when something noteworthy has entered the room. Clara had long been accustomed to the specific weight of a small community's attention, but she had always carried it alone before. Walking through the door with Elias beside her, not behind, not in front but beside, was a different experience entirely. Margaret Harlan looked up from behind the counter. Her expression moved through three things, quickly: surprise, assessment, and something that resolved into what Clara recognized as cautious approval. "Clara," she said. "And Mr. Carter." "Margaret," Clara said. "I need to check the territorial registry notices for the last 6 months. Do you have the file?" Margaret kept the copied notices from Helena as a service to the valley. Everyone knew this. She reached under the counter without comment and produced a bound folder. Clara took it to the side table. Elias, meanwhile, moved to the far end of the counter and began a quiet conversation with Harold Harlan about lumber pricing, which was perfectly legitimate and entirely unremarkable, and which allowed him to be in the same room hearing the same things without drawing attention to what Clara was actually looking for. She found it in 9 minutes. A filing 6 weeks old under the name of a company called Western Progress Development for a preliminary survey, claim on the creek access corridor running through the Southern Valley. The claim was not for land purchase, it was for a water rights assessment, a precursor, a legal footprint planted in advance of a larger move. Western Progress Development. She did not know the name. She copied the registration number and the filing date onto a slip of paper and folded it into her coat pocket. She closed the folder and returned it to Margaret without comment. "Thank you," she said. "Of course," Margaret said. And then quietly, as Clara turned to go, "Be careful, Clara. Roy Decker was in here yesterday asking Harold whether you'd received any legal correspondence recently. He said it was a friendly inquiry." Clara looked at her. What did Harold tell him? That he had no idea, and it wasn't his business. "Thank you, Harold," Clara said toward the back of the store where Harold Harlan had apparently been listening to every word while discussing lumber pricing with a man from Ohio. "Anytime, Mrs. Whitmore," Harold said without turning around. Elias caught her eye as she moved toward the door. She gave the faintest nod. He wrapped up his conversation in 30 seconds flat and followed her out. In the street, the cold air hit her face like a hand. "Western Progress Development," she said. 6 weeks ago, water rights survey on the creek corridor." Elias was quiet for a moment. "He was already moving before he came to see you," he said. "He was already moving before he came to see me," Clara confirmed. "The friendly offer was a courtesy, or a test to see if I'd make it easy." "You didn't?" "No." They walked toward the wagon in silence for a moment. "Clara," Elias said, "this is going to get more complicated before it gets simpler." "I know. The land isn't the only thing at risk. If this company is filing survey claims, they may already have arrangements in place with other landowners in the valley. Other pieces of the puzzle that make your property the critical one." "I know," she said again. "You're not afraid," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm furious," Clara said. "There's a difference." Elias stopped walking. She stopped 2 steps later and looked back at him. He was looking at her with that expression she had started to recognize, the one that was not quite admiration and not quite amusement, but contained elements of both and something else underneath that she was not ready to put a name to. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I'm just—" He started walking again, pulling level with her. "I'm glad your letter was in that newspaper." Clara said nothing, but the furious cold in her chest shifted just slightly to accommodate something warmer. That evening by the stove in the main house, the first evening Elias had spent inside, rather than on the cabin step, they spread what they knew across the kitchen table. The filing number, the name, the 6-week timeline, the creek corridor. "If I write to Helena," Clara said, "it will take 2 weeks for a response. 3 with winter mail. Do you know anyone in Helena who could look into it faster? Daniel's brother Frank was a surveyor. He moved to Helena 3 years ago." A pause. "We haven't spoken much since Daniel died. He took it hard in his own way." "Would he help you?" Clara looked at the paper on the table. "I think," she said slowly, "that if I told him someone was trying to take the land his brother spent his life building, Frank Whitmore would find the relevant documents in that office inside 48 hours. Then write to him tonight," Elias said. "I'll write it to the post in the morning before the weather gets worse." She looked up at him. "You'd ride out in this snow?" "It's 6 miles to town," Elias said. "I've ridden longer and worse." And for a moment, they simply looked at each other across the kitchen table with the paper between them and the stove, heat around them and outside the Montana winter pressing against the windows. "I still don't know what I'm going to do about you," Clara said. The words surprised her. She had not intended to say them aloud. But Elias did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for that sentence with patience. "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean you came here for one reason. And now we are sitting at my kitchen table planning a legal counter-strategy against a land developer, and the reason you came here has become— I don't know what it has become. It's become something real," Elias said. "I don't know what I feel," Clara said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I don't know how to do this. I knew how to be Daniel's wife. I knew how to be a widow. I do not know how to be a woman who is—" She stopped. "Who is what?" Elias asked quietly. "Who is beginning to want something again," Clara said. The room was very quiet. Elias looked at the table, then at her. "Then want it slowly," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Clara looked at him for a long time. "You say that like you're certain," she said. "I am certain." "You can't be certain. You've been here 2 weeks." "I know what I came here for," Elias said. "And I know that every day I've been here has told me I came for the right reason. Not because you need me, because—" He found the words. "Because watching you work and talk and think and fight for what's yours, it's the first time in 4 years that I have felt like myself again. Like the man I was before Ruth died, before the grief made everything quiet and flat. You did that by just being who you are." He paused. "That's not something I'm willing to walk away from." Clara was very still. "You should go to the cabin," she said, not unkindly. "We should both think." "Yes," he said. He stood. He picked up his coat. At the door, he stopped. "The letter is still in my coat pocket," he said. "It has been since Ohio. I've never taken it out except to show you. I don't think I carried it this far just to put it down." He went out into the dark. Clara sat at the table alone with the papers in front of her, and the empty chair pushed 6 inches to the left and the warmth of the stove, and she pressed her hand flat against the surface of the table where his hands had been. She sat there for a long time, and when she finally got up to write the letter to Frank Whitmore, her hands were steady. She wrote 2 pages without stopping. Outside, the snow fell, and somewhere in the dark of the guest cabin, a man from Ohio waited with the patience of someone who had finally found the place he intended to stay. Frank Whitmore's letter arrived on a Thursday. Clara knew it was from Frank before she opened it, because he wrote his return address in the upper left corner, the same way he had done since he was 12 years old. Last name. First, neat block letters, the habit of a surveyor who had learned early that precision in small things prevented disasters in large ones. She stood at the mailbox in the cold and held the envelope for a moment before she broke the seal. She read it twice, standing in the road. Then she folded it carefully, put it in her coat pocket, and walked back to the ranch at a pace that was faster than usual. Elias was in the barn replacing a cracked water pipe fitting when she came through the door. He looked up at her face and set down his tools. "Frank wrote back," she said. "How fast?" "He must have gone to the land office the same day my letter arrived." She pulled the envelope from her pocket. "Western Progress Development is not a mill company. It has never filed a mill application anywhere in the territory. It is a land acquisition company. Its principal investor is a man named Gerald Croft, who has been quietly purchasing water corridor access rights across 3 Montana counties for the past 18 months. Elias was very still. "What does he do with the water rights once he has them?" he asked. "Frank says he's been approached by a railroad concern. A northern rail extension that would require consistent water supply at multiple points along the proposed route. The company that controls the water access controls the terms of the railroad deal." She looked up from the letter. "We're not talking about a mill, Elias. We're talking about a railroad." "And your creek is a link in the chain," he said. "Without my property, the corridor has a gap of nearly a mile with no legal water access. Frank says every other parcel in the Southern Valley has either been purchased outright or has had an access agreement signed." She folded the letter again. "I am the last piece." The barn was quiet, except for the wind finding the gaps in the siding. "Decker knew all of this," Elias said. "Decker has been Croft's local agent from the beginning. The friendly offer, the concerned neighbor routine, all of it was designed to make me feel like selling was my own idea before I understood what I was actually being asked to give up." "How much time do we have?" "Frank says the railroad concern is expecting a complete corridor agreement within 60 days. After that, the route planning moves forward with or without the gap, which means they find another solution, and the value of your corridor access drops to nothing." She looked at him. 60 days is generous. Croft will move on us well before that. Move how?" Clara looked at the letter one more time. "Frank didn't want to write the next part," she said. "He said he'd heard things, that Croft's company had faced resistance on 2 other parcels in different counties, that both situations resolved in Croft's favor after complications." "What kind of complications?" "He didn't say specifically. He said he'd be coming to the ranch within the week to tell me in person what he'd heard." She put the letter away. "Frank is a careful man. If he won't put something in a letter, it's because he thinks the letter might be read by someone other than me." That landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Elias picked up his tools, set them down again. "We need to talk to a lawyer," he said. "The nearest lawyer who isn't already in Croft's pocket is probably in Helena. Then we find out if there's one." He said it with the flat certainty of someone who has already decided that the alternative is unacceptable. "And between now and Frank's arrival, we document everything. Every conversation with Decker, every date, every offer made. Written down, dated, witnessed." "You sound like you've done this before." "I told you about the man who tried to buy my building in Ohio," Elias said. "I lost 2 years of sleep because I didn't document early enough and didn't understand what I was dealing with until I was already behind." His jaw was tight. "I'm not doing that again." Clara looked at him. He had said it without thinking. "I'm not doing that again," as if her fight was already his fight, as if the line between what was hers and what was theirs had already moved somewhere without either of them formally deciding to move it. She did not point this out. "We start tonight," she said. "Yes," Elias said, and they went to work. Tent. Roy Decker came back 4 days later, and this time he did not come alone. Clara saw the 2 horses from the kitchen window and recognized Roy's gray immediately. The second horse she did not know. The man riding it was well dressed for the territory coat. 2 clean boots, 2 new. The particular presentation of someone who wanted to appear casual about his wealth and had not quite succeeded. She straightened her back and went to the door. Elias was already in the yard. She did not know how he had seen them coming. The cabin window faced the wrong direction, but he was there standing near the fence post with his arms loose at his sides and his expression perfectly, deliberately neutral. Not threatening, not deferential, just present. "Clara," Roy said, swinging down. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "Roy," she said, "I'd like to introduce Gerald Croft. He's the developer I mentioned. He was passing through the valley and expressed a desire to meet you personally." Gerald Croft was perhaps 55, silver at the temples. A handshake that was practiced and warm, and communicated very precisely that he considered himself a reasonable man. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I've heard a great deal about your operation here. Impressive what you've built." "Thank you," Clara said. "What can I do for you, Mr. Croft?" "I'll be direct," Croft said with the smile of someone who planned to be anything but. "Roy tells me you've had some hesitation about the offer he presented. I understand completely. Selling land you've worked is not a small decision. I respect that. I'd like to talk through any concerns you have and see if there's an arrangement that makes this easier for you." "I don't have concerns," Clara said. "I have an answer, which I gave Roy on his last visit." "Of course." Croft nodded slowly. "But I wonder if that answer might change with a more complete picture. The development we're planning is significant. It will bring infrastructure, employment, economic activity to this entire valley. The families here stand to benefit considerably." "What development?" Clara said. Croft paused. Just a half second. "A processing operation," he said. "As Roy explained a mill," Clara said. "I'd be interested to hear you describe this processing operation in more detail. What it processes, where it ships, which rail line it connects to, if any." The pause was longer this time. Roy had gone very still. Croft recovered smoothly. He was practiced at this, she could tell. Practiced at the pivot, the redirect, the warm recalibration. "You've clearly done some research," he said. "I appreciate that in a business conversation. Let me be frank with you. This project is larger than a single mill, yes. There is a rail connection involved. That connection will bring—" "Which railroad?" Elias asked. He had not moved from the fence post. He said it pleasantly without aggression, as if he were asking the time of day. Croft looked at him for the first time with real attention. "I'm sorry, and you are?" "Elias Carter. I work with Mrs. Whitmore." Croft looked at Roy. Roy said nothing, which was itself an answer. "The Northern Pacific Extension," Croft said after a moment, "which I think you know, Mr. Carter, or you wouldn't be asking." His voice had shifted, not hostile, but recalibrated again, this time to something more frank and less performative. "Mrs. Whitmore, your property represents the final corridor access point for a project that will benefit this entire region. I want to compensate you fairly and substantially for it. That is not a threat. That is a genuine offer from a man who has spent 18 months putting together something that can change this valley. And if I say no," Clara said. Croft looked at her. "Then we explore other options," he said. "But I would encourage you to think carefully before that becomes necessary. Other landowners who initially declined to cooperate found the process considerably more complicated." There it was, not quite a threat, plausibly deniable as a warning, as friendly advice as concern. The exact language a careful man used when he wanted you to understand what he was capable of without giving you anything written down. Clara felt the cold settle into her chest. Not fear exactly. The same furious clarity she had felt in the street in town when she first understood what was actually at stake. "Mr. Croft," she said, "I suggest you speak to a lawyer before your next visit, because so will I." Croft held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he put on his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Roy." They rode out. Clara stood on the porch until the sound of hooves disappeared, and then she breathed. Elias came to the bottom of the porch steps. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm furious, but I'm fine." She looked at him. "You knew he'd confirm the railroad. I knew he'd try not to. But men like that don't like to be caught in a small lie when they think there's an advantage in appearing reasonable. Better to admit the larger truth and try to reframe it." He paused. "He's moving up his timeline. That visit was not a courtesy. That was him checking whether you knew what you knew. And now he knows I know." "Yes." Clara stepped down from the porch. "Then we need Frank here faster than next week," she said. She went inside to write a second letter. Frank Whitmore arrived 2 days later, which meant he had been writing before her second letter reached him, which meant he had already understood that time was shorter than he'd said. He was 54, lean in the way of men who had spent 30 years outdoors working with instruments and elevation maps. He had Daniel's eyes, the same particular gray-green that caught light strangely, and it hit Clara in the chest every time she saw him, even now, 4 years on. He came through the kitchen door and hugged her briefly and hard, and then held her at arm's length and looked at her face. "You look tired," he said. "I look exactly how I feel," she said. "Which is not tired, which is ready." Frank looked past her at Elias, who had stood up from the table. "Frank Whitmore," Frank said, extending his hand. "Elias Carter." The handshake was the particular kind that two men use when they are each deciding quickly whether the other one is someone they can work with. It lasted about 2 seconds. Something passed between them, an assessment mutual and rapid, and Frank sat down. "Tell me everything from the beginning," Frank said. "Not what you wrote. Everything." Clara told him. She told it straight through: the first visit from Roy, the filing she'd found in Harlan's store, the letter from Frank himself, and then Croft's visit, his words, his implication. Elias added 2 things. She had not mentioned the exact phrasing Croft had used about other landowners, who had found the process complicated, and the fact that Croft had looked specifically at Elias when Roy failed to explain his presence, as if cross-referencing something. "He knew you were here," Frank said to Elias, before he rode out. "That's what I thought," Elias said. "Roy's been watching the property," Frank said. He said it without surprise, which meant it was something he had already suspected. There are 2 other ranches in this valley where Croft's company ran into resistance. The first, a man named Aldrich east of here, had a boundary dispute appear out of nowhere. Old survey error supposedly. Tied up his land status for 8 months. By the time it resolved, he'd spent more in legal fees than the offer was worth, and he sold. He paused. The second was a widow. Name of Bessie Crane, over in Jefferson County. Clara went still. "What happened to Bessie Crane?" she asked. Frank looked at his hands. "Her well went bad," he said. "Early winter 2 years ago. Contaminated," the county inspector said. "Nothing she could prove otherwise. By spring she had no water source, sick livestock, and no money left to fight. She sold in March." He looked up. "I don't know for certain that Croft's company was behind either of those situations. I want to be clear about that, but the pattern is there for someone who looks for it." The kitchen was very quiet. "He's going to come after the water," Elias said. It wasn't a question. "The well, the creek access, or both," Frank said. "If he can compromise either one, the ranch becomes significantly harder to operate. You get enough pressure on a woman alone, and—" He stopped, looked at Clara. "He doesn't know you're not alone." "He does now," Clara said. "He saw Elias." "What's Elias to him as far as he knows?" "Hired help," Elias said. "That's what I told Roy the first time. Carpenter hired on for repairs." Frank nodded slowly. "Then for now, let him think that. A hired carpenter is not a legal complication. He glanced at Clara carefully. "What is your actual situation?" Clara looked at Frank. She looked at Elias. Elias came to Montana because I wrote a letter to a marriage agency 14 months ago, she said. It was the first time she had said it plainly to anyone in the valley without deflection or reframing. He is here because I asked someone to come, and he was the one who answered. Frank was quiet for a moment. And where do things stand between you? He asked. We haven't decided yet, Clara said. All right. Frank looked at Elias. Can I ask you something directly? Yes, Elias said. Are you staying? The word landed in the kitchen like something with weight. Elias did not hesitate. Yes, he said. Frank held his gaze for another second, then nodded once. Then here is what we need to do, he said. Odd. They worked through that evening and into the night. Frank had brought documents copies he had made himself from the Helena Land Office, careful survey maps, the actual text of the water rights filing, and a name. A lawyer in Helena named Edwin Marsh, who had already worked against Western Progress Development on behalf of a ranch owner in Deer Lodge County, and who had won. He won on a procedural point, Frank said, but he won. And he knows where the gaps in their strategy are. Can we get him here in time? Clara asked. I'll ride to Helena myself tomorrow. I know Ed Marsh. He'll come. Frank looked at the map on the table. The critical thing is to establish your water rights in writing before they can file any challenge. You have prior use and documented history. That is your strongest position. How long does that take? If Marsh files immediately, 2 weeks, 3 at the outside. Croft's timeline is 60 days from when Frank first told me, Clara said. But if he's accelerating? He's accelerating, Elias said. He drove out here personally. That's not what he does when he has time. Frank rolled up the map. I'll leave before dawn. Ed Marsh will be in Helena when I arrive, and I'll be back inside a week with an answer. He looked at Clara. In the meantime, you watch the well. You watch the creek. Any change in the water, any unfamiliar riders near the south pasture, anything that feels wrong, you write it down, and you do not touch it until Marsh has seen it. And if someone shows up on the property, Clara asked. Same answer. Document it, date it, witness it. Frank paused. You have a witness now. He glanced at Elias. Elias said nothing, but Clara saw it the quiet, unmistakable exchange between two men who had reached in the course of a single evening a working understanding. Frank Whitmore went to the spare room. Clara cleared the table. Elias was the last to stand, and he stood slowly looking at the place where the map had been. Are you afraid? He asked. I told you, Clara said. I'm furious. Clara. She looked up. Are you afraid? He asked again differently. Not about the land, not about Croft. The way a person asks it when they mean, tell me the truth. Tell me what you feel underneath the anger, underneath the competence, underneath the woman who has handled everything alone for 4 years, and who handles it so well that no one thinks to ask if it costs her anything. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. I'm afraid of losing the land Daniel built. I'm afraid of Croft's company and what they did to Bessie Crane and what they might try here. She put her hand flat on the table. And I'm afraid of what I feel when I sit at this table with you. Because I don't know how to want something again without being terrified of losing it. Elias crossed the kitchen slowly. He stood on the other side of the table. He did not touch her. He said, I lost Ruth, and I spent 4 years waiting to stop being afraid of wanting something again. And then I read a letter from a woman in Montana who said she wasn't looking for rescue. She was looking for someone to carry the weight alongside her. He looked at her. I am afraid too. I am afraid every single day that this is too good to be real and that I will do something wrong and lose it. But I am more afraid of what my life looks like if I let that fear make the decision. Clara looked at him across the table. Go to the cabin, she said. Get some sleep. Frank leaves before dawn, and we will need to be up. Yes, he said. He turned to go. Elias. He stopped. Thank you, she said. For staying. He looked at her over his shoulder. You're welcome, he said simply. Good night, Clara. He went out into the cold, and Clara stood at the table alone and pressed her fingers against the wood where his hands had been and understood for the first time without flinching from it that what was happening in this kitchen was not a transaction or an arrangement or a letter coming to life. It was two people who had survived loss, choosing carefully and with full knowledge of the cost to stop surviving and start living again. She turned down the lamp. She went to bed. She slept. The storm came without warning on a Tuesday night, 3 days after Frank rode for Helena. It was not the first snow of the season. They had already had 6 inches twice before, but this was different. This was the kind of storm that Montana Saved Clara had learned for the moments when you were already carrying too much. A full blizzard moving in from the northwest with the speed and silence of a predator. By midnight, the wind was strong enough to pull at the shutters. By 2 in the morning, Clara was already awake, already dressed, already out with a lantern, because the livestock had to be checked and secured, and she was not willing to wait for light. She got the horses in. She got the cows in. She was fighting with the chicken coop latch the repair Elias had made held, but the door was pulling hard against the wind when she realized she had not seen the light from the cabin. She turned. The cabin window was dark. She finished securing the coop and crossed the yard and knocked twice. No answer. She pushed the door open. The stove was cold. The lantern was unlit. The cabin was empty. Elias was already gone. Clara stood in the dark of the empty cabin and felt the cold move into her stomach in a way that was not entirely about temperature. She had been here before, not in this cabin, not in this storm, but in this exact emotional geography. The moment when someone you have begun to count on is suddenly without warning not where you expected them to be. She did not stand still this time. She grabbed the spare lantern from the cabin shelf, lit it, and went out. She found his tracks in the snow, already half filled but still readable, heading south. Toward the creek, toward the south pasture, toward the exact boundary of her property that Gerald Croft's company had spent 18 months trying to acquire. Clara followed the tracks at a dead run. She heard him before she saw him. His voice not calling out but speaking low and hard, and with the specific tension of someone who has discovered something and is trying to remain controlled about it. She came around the south fence line and saw two things at the same moment. Elias, standing at the edge of the creek bank with the lantern raised high, and 20 yards upstream, where the water should have been moving freely under the thin ice, a blockage. Not a natural one. Logs and packed debris freshly arranged, the kind of obstruction that does not happen by weather alone. And beside Elias, in the swinging light of 2 lanterns, a man she did not recognize. A worker, clearly rough coat, heavy gloves, the tools of someone who had been hired to do something physical in the dark in a blizzard, and had been found doing it. "Clara, stop," Elias said immediately when he heard her approach. Not to protect her from the stranger, to tell her what she needed to know about the situation before she walked into it. The stranger looked at her. He looked at Elias. He was young, 25 at most, and he had the expression of someone who had understood in the past 5 minutes that the job he'd been paid to do was more serious than he'd been told. "I didn't know it was. They said it was a drainage survey," the young man said. "They said I was adjusting a natural blockage." "Who told you that?" Clara demanded. "A man named—" He stopped, swallowed. "He paid me in cash. Said it was a county water management project." "At 2 in the morning, Elias said flatly. The young man looked down. "I need his name," Clara said. He didn't give me a full name." "What did he look like?" Elias asked. The description that came out was not Croft and not Roy Decker. A third man, an intermediary, exactly the kind of buffer a careful operation puts between itself and the actions it doesn't want traced back. Clara turned to the blockage. "Clear it," she said to Elias. "Already started," he said. "I'll help," the young man said with the desperation of someone who wants very badly to be on the right side of this situation. "You'll watch," Clara said. "And when we're done, you'll write down every word you were told, who told you where you met him and what you were paid. And you'll sign it. And you'll understand that your name is now attached to what was done here, and the only way it stays unattached is if you cooperate fully with whatever legal action follows." The young man stared at her. You're not going to. I'm not going to do anything except give you one opportunity to be useful instead of liable, Clara said. Take it. He took it. Clara held both lanterns while Elias worked. The blockage was not deeply set. It was designed to divert water gradually, to look like natural accumulation, to create a slow poisoning of the water access that might not be noticed until real damage was done. Elias understood immediately what had been done and how to reverse it. Carpenter's hands. Practical mind. The same man who had packed Salter from Ohio because he didn't know what shape things would be in when he arrived. It took 40 minutes in a blizzard. When the water was moving freely again, Clara turned to him. His coat was soaked. His hands were bleeding at one knuckle from the wood and the cold. She took his hand without thinking, both of hers around his one, and held it. He looked at her. He looked at their hands. He said nothing. "Come inside," she said. The young man. "He's coming too. He has a statement to write." They walked back through the storm, all three of them, to the main house, and Clara held Elias's hand the entire way. She did not let go until they reached the porch, and even then, she was the one who let go last. Inside, by the kitchen stove with the blizzard against the windows and the young man's written statement taking shape at the table, Clara looked at Elias's cut knuckle and cleaned it without being asked, and wrapped it with the strip of linen she kept in the medicine box. He sat very still while she worked. "You went out alone," she said, "in a blizzard." "I heard something," he said. "I wasn't sure what it was." "You could have woken me." "I wasn't certain enough yet." She wrapped the last turn of linen and tied it off. "Next time," she said, "wake me." He looked at her hands still around his. "Yes," he said. Outside, the storm pressed against Montana territory with everything it had. Inside, something had shifted that was not coming back, and neither of them said so out loud, because they did not need to. The young man's name was Peter Hollis. He was 23 years old, the second son of a dry goods merchant in Billings, and he had come to the valley 6 weeks earlier, looking for seasonal work, because his father's business had a bad year, and the family needed the income. He had found Roy Decker's posting on the board outside the postal exchange. Labor needed drainage survey work, fair pay, no experience required, and he had taken it because it paid 30 cents more per hour than anything else available, and because he had not known enough to ask the right questions. He wrote all of this down at Clara's kitchen table in a hand that was unsteady at first, and steadier as the night wore on, while the blizzard continued outside and the stove worked to keep the room warm. He wrote the date he was hired, the amount he was paid, the instructions he received, and the name of the man who gave them, not Roy Decker, not Gerald Croft, but a third man who called himself Harris, and who had met Peter at a livestock auction 2 weeks prior and told him the work was legitimate county business. When Peter got to that part, he stopped writing. "What happens to me?" he asked. "That depends on what you do next," Clara said. "I didn't know it was. I was told it was drainage work. I was told the landowner had already been notified." "Someone lied to you," Elias said. "Not unkindly. That doesn't make you innocent, but it makes you considerably less culpable than the person who hired you. What do I need to do?" "You finish the statement," Clara said. "You sign it. You put a date on it. And when a lawyer named Edwin Marsh arrives from Helena within the next week, you repeat everything you've written under oath if necessary." Peter looked at the paper. "And if I do that," he said, "what happens to me?" "You get to go home to Billings," Clara said, "with a clear conscience and a story you can tell your father about what happens when you don't read a job posting carefully enough." Something in the young man's posture shifted the particular release of someone who has been braced for a punishment and found a fair outcome instead. He picked up the pen. He finished the statement. He signed it. Clara dated it, and Elias witnessed it, and she folded it and put it with the other documents in the wooden box that now sat on the shelf above the kitchen window, the same shelf where she kept Daniel's letters, her mother's correspondence, and the deed to the ranch. The box was getting full. She did not think that was a bad sign. She gave Peter Hollis a meal and a blanket on the floor by the stove because the storm was still pushing hard against the windows, and in the morning, She let him take one of the ranch horses back to town, with the understanding that he would leave it at Harlan's feed, with a note that said it belonged to Clara Whitmore. He left before full light. She stood on the porch and watched him go. "You believe him?" Elias asked from behind her. "I believe he's 23 and didn't know what he was getting into," she said. "I've met enough dishonest men in the last month to recognize an honest one when I see him. He'll be back in town by mid-morning. I know. Decker will find out by noon that something went wrong last night. I know that too." She turned from the door. "Which means we need Frank back before Decker decides what to do about it. Frank's been in Helena 4 days. He should be on his way back already." "Should be," Clara said. "Isn't the same as is." She went inside. She put the coffee on. She sat at the kitchen table with the wooden box in front of her and thought about what she was carrying: the documents, the statement, the water rights filing Frank's copies from the land office, and she thought about what was still missing. Edwin Marsh. Frank. 60 days' worth of legal protection that did not yet exist on paper. Elias sat across from her. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Tell me what you need." Clara looked at him. "I need Marsh here," she said. "I need the water rights filed before Croft finds another angle. I need someone to tell me that what I'm holding in this box is enough to make this stop." "It might not be," Elias said. "I know. Even with Marsh, even with Peter Hollis's statement. These things are not quick. They are not clean. Croft has money and patience, and he has done this before." "I know all of that," Clara said. "I'm not trying to discourage you," Elias said. "I'm trying to make sure you know what you're walking into, because I've been in a version of this before, and I want you to go in with clear eyes." Clara looked at him steadily. "My eyes have been clear since the first morning you went out and fixed my fence without being asked," she said. "I know what I'm walking into. I knew it the moment I read Frank's letter. I just need you to tell me honestly whether you think we have enough." Elias was quiet for a moment. "I think Peter Hollis's signed statement connecting the water blockage to a hired intermediary is significant," he said. "I think Frank's documentation of the pattern across other counties is significant. I think the fact that Croft visited you personally and made an implied threat in front of a witness," he looked at her, "in front of 2 witnesses is significant. But significant is not the same as sufficient. Marsh will know the difference." Clara pressed her hands flat on the table. "Then we wait for Marsh," she said. "And we keep watching the south pasture. And we do not let Croft know how much we have until Marsh tells us it's time." "Agreed," Elias said. The coffee was ready. She poured 2 cups without thinking about it, set one in front of him, and sat back down. Neither of them commented on how entirely natural it had become. Frank arrived on a Friday 3 days after the blizzard, with Edwin Marsh riding beside him. Marsh was not what Clara had expected. She had built a picture in her mind of the kind of lawyer who fought land acquisition companies, aggressive, performative, a man who walked into rooms loudly. Marsh was 60, compact with a quiet voice, and the specific economy of movement of someone who had learned that energy spent on impression was energy not spent on thinking. He shook her hand. He shook Elias's hand. He asked for coffee and a table, and said he needed 2 hours with the documents before he could tell them anything useful. He took 3 hours. When he came out of the kitchen, where he had been working alone, his expression was not what she had hoped for, and not what she had feared. It was precise and careful, which she was starting to understand was simply how he operated. "You have a strong position," he said. Prior water use documented ranch history, the witness statement from Hollis Frank's documentation of the pattern across counties, all of that is material. Here is the problem. He sat down. "The problem," Marsh said, "is that Western Progress Development filed a conditional water access claim with the Territorial Office 8 days ago. Not a purchase offer, a claim, based on an argument that the creek corridor crosses a section of land whose original survey boundary is ambiguous." Clara felt the air go out of the room. "Which section?" Frank asked sharply. "The southwestern corner, a 40-acre parcel at the base of the ridge." Marsh looked at Clara. "Do you know if there was ever a boundary dispute on that section?" "No," Clara said. "Never. Daniel surveyed the entire property when he purchased it. Where are his survey records? Marsh asked. Clara was already moving. The survey records were in the bottom of the wooden box, the original documents Daniel had commissioned in 1879 before they had even broken ground on the house. They were the kind of documents a careful man kept because a careful man understood that paper was the only thing that outlasted memory. Clara spread them on the table, and Marsh studied them with the focused attention of a man reading scripture. Frank came to stand beside him. "There," Frank said. He pointed to the southwestern corner. "Daniel's survey is clear. The boundary line runs from the ridge marker to the creek junction. It's unambiguous." "It is unambiguous on Daniel's survey," Marsh said. "But Croft's company is arguing a different reading of the original territorial land grant the document that predates Daniel's purchase. They're claiming the language of the grant allows for an alternative interpretation of the ridge marker." He looked up. The territorial judge who would hear this argument is a man named Oliver Crew. He is stationed in Missoula. "Do you know him?" Clara asked. Marsh paused. It was a 1-second pause, but Clara caught it. "I know him," Marsh said. "He is an honest man. He is also a man who has a significant investment in railroad development, which is public knowledge, and which he has not recused himself from in past cases involving rail corridor disputes, because the investment is indirect." The kitchen was very quiet. "So Croft filed in a jurisdiction with a judge who has a financial stake in the railroad succeeding," Elias said. "That is the situation," Marsh said. "Can we have the case moved?" Frank asked. "We can file a motion. It will take time and there is no guarantee it will be granted." Marsh looked at Clara. "I want to be honest with you. This is still winnable, but the path is narrower than I'd like. We need to counter the boundary argument before Crew has a chance to rule on the claim, and we need to do it with documentation that is bulletproof." "What does bulletproof mean?" Clara asked. "It means," Marsh said, "that Daniel's original survey needs to be corroborated by an independent resurvey of the southwestern corner, conducted by a licensed territorial surveyor, submitted to the Helena office before Crew schedules a hearing." He looked at Frank. "How quickly can you get back to Helena?" Frank looked at Clara. "I'll leave tonight," he said. "Frank," she started. "I know 2 surveyors in Helena who work fast and don't ask too many questions," Frank said. "I'll have one of them out here within the week." He put his hand briefly on Clara's shoulder. "Daniel's boundary was clear. We just have to prove it again." It was the most he had said about Daniel in 4 years. Clara put her hand over his for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Frank said. "Thank me when this is done." Bud. Roy Decker came the following morning. This time he came alone, which told Clara something. He did not come with Croft's polished presentation or the implied muscle of money and lawyers and elaborate schemes. He came alone at 8 in the morning, looking like a man who had spent several sleepless nights revising his understanding of how things were going. Clara met him at the gate. Elias was 10 feet behind her where she had asked him to be present visible, but not in front. "Roy," she said. "Clara." He looked past her at Elias. He looked back at her. Something in his face had changed from the last time. The smooth professional warmth was mostly gone, and what was underneath it was complicated. Not entirely hard, not entirely calculating. Something that might have been buried under everything else, a version of regret. "I'd like to talk to you alone." "No," she said simply. Roy looked at his hands. "All right," he said. "Then I'll say it with him here." He exhaled. "I've been doing business with Gerald Croft for 3 years. When he came to me about the Valley properties, it seemed straightforward. Land acquisition fair offers legitimate development. I have done this kind of work before, Clara. I am a land agent. It is what I do." "It is," she agreed. "Go on." "When Bessie Crane's situation happened in Jefferson County, Croft told me it was unconnected to the acquisition. A coincidence." Roy's jaw moved. "I accepted that because I wanted to. Because the commission was good and the work was easy, and I told myself I was just a middleman." He looked at her. What happened at your creek 3 nights ago was not what I was told would happen. I was told Harris was going to conduct a survey, a legitimate survey. Harris was paid to block a watercourse in the middle of a blizzard, Clara said. That is not a survey. I know that now. What do you want, Roy? He was quiet for a moment. I want you to know that I did not understand the full picture, he said. And I want you to know... He stopped, started again. Edwin Marsh is a good lawyer, Clara. Whatever you've told him, he'll do right by you. I know Ed Marsh. He paused. And Croft knows you've contacted him. He's not going to stop. He's too far in. But I am done being his mechanism. Clara looked at him for a long time. Are you telling me you'll cooperate with Marsh? She asked. Roy took a slow breath. I'm telling you I won't work against you anymore, he said. I don't know if I'm ready to stand up in a court and say what I know. I have a business in this valley. I have a family. He looked at her. But I won't work against you. That's not enough, Elias said. Roy looked at him. I know, Roy said. If Croft is as dangerous as you're implying, Elias said, then stepping aside isn't the same as helping. Bessie Crane stepped aside. How is she now? Roy had no answer to that. We're not asking you to be a hero, Clara said more quietly. We're asking you to tell the truth, whatever the truth is, because you're standing here telling me you didn't know the full picture, and I believe you partly, but the full picture hurt real people, and real people standing aside doesn't fix that. Roy stared at the ground. Give me 3 days, he said. You have one, Clara said. Marsh is already working. If you want your name on the right side of this when it resolves, you have 1 day to decide what you're willing to say. Roy looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned his horse around and left. Elias came to stand beside her at the gate. Do you believe him? He asked. I believe he's scared, she said. And I believe he's ashamed. Whether that's enough to make him useful, I'll know tomorrow. And if he doesn't come back, then Marsh works with what we have, Clara said, which is more than Croft knows. She turned from the gate. She had walked 4 steps toward the house when Elias said her name. She stopped. She turned. He was standing at the gate with an expression she had not seen on him before, not calm, not measured, but something unguarded and direct that he had apparently decided to stop holding back. I need to say something to you, he said. All right, she said. When Peter Hollis came out here that night, when I found the blockage, when I understood what they were willing to do. He stopped, steadied himself. I was afraid, not for the land, not for the legal situation. I was afraid for you, specifically for you. And I need you to know that, because I've spent the better part of a month being careful and measured and trying not to get ahead of where you are, and I think that's been right. But I also think I need you to know where I stand. Clara looked at him across the yard. Where do you stand? She asked. With you, he said. Not on your side of a business dispute. Not as a hired hand or a useful witness or a man you're deciding what to do with. He held her gaze. I love you, Clara. I know it's fast. I know we've known each other less than 2 months. But I have been honest with you about everything else, and I'm not willing to be dishonest about this. The yard was very quiet. The cold air pressed around them both. Clara stood still and let the words land where they needed to land. I don't know what I feel, she said, honestly. I know what I want to feel. I know what I'm afraid of feeling. I know, he said. I need you to not make this harder than it already is. I'm not trying to make it harder, he said. I'm trying to make it true. Whatever you decide, whatever happens with this land and this fight and what comes next, I want you to know the truth of where I stand, so you can decide with full information. Clara looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Come in. Marsh needs to go over the survey documents again, and I need 2 pairs of eyes that understand what they're looking at. She went inside. Elias stood at the gate for 3 more seconds. Then he followed her. And that was the thing about Elias Carter that Clara had understood slowly and surely over the course of 2 months. He never pushed past the door she had opened. He stepped through when she opened it, and he waited when she didn't, and he made the waiting look like something a person could do without resentment. That was not a small thing. That was perhaps the most important thing. Roy Decker came back in 22 hours. Not 24. 22. He came at 6 in the morning before Clara had finished the livestock, and he had a leather satchel under his arm, and an expression that had traveled a long distance overnight and arrived somewhere that looked like resolve. Marsh was already up working at the kitchen table. Roy Decker sat across from Edwin Marsh and opened the satchel and laid out 3 years of correspondence between himself and Gerald Croft's various company representatives. Letters, contracts, payment receipts, and 2 documents that made Marsh go completely still for 30 seconds before he said very quietly, "Where did you get these?" "Copies I kept for myself," Roy said. "I keep copies of everything. Old habit. These are internal company communications, transfer agreements between Western Progress Development and the railroad concern, signed and dated." "Yes. These establish a direct financial relationship between Croft's acquisition activity and the railroad's planned route." "Yes." "Roy." Marsh looked at him. "Do you understand what you've handed me?" Roy Decker looked at Clara. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 12. I've been telling myself for 3 years that what I do for a living is just business. That's what men like Croft tell you. It's just business. Nothing personal. The market does what the market does." He looked at the documents on the table. "Bessie Crane lost her ranch. She's living with her sister now. Her husband built that place with his hands for 30 years. His voice was steady, but only just. "I told myself it wasn't my fault. I was a middleman." "Roy," Clara said. "I know," he said. "I know." The kitchen held that weight for a moment. Then Marsh began organizing the documents. "I need to file in Helena by end of week," he said. "Roy, I'll need a signed statement, a full account of your involvement, what you knew and when, and specifically what Croft told you about the situations in Jefferson County and Deer Lodge." Roy nodded. He picked up the pen that Marsh set in front of him. He did not put it down for 2 hours. When he was done, he stood and put on his coat and looked at Clara. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he said. "No," Clara said, "but it helps." Roy left, and for the first time since Frank's letter arrived since the filing, the boundary claim, the blizzard Peter Hollis, the water blockage, all of it. Clara felt the specific sensation of a scale beginning to tip in a direction she could live with. Marsh looked up from the documents. "I'm going to Helena tonight," he said. "I'm filing a counterclaim, a petition to review the boundary argument, and a formal complaint against Western Progress Development with the Territorial Attorney General's office." He paused. Roy Decker's materials change this significantly. The direct connection to the railroad concern undermines the legitimacy of the entire acquisition strategy. "How long?" Clara asked. "Weeks," Marsh said. "Not months. Croft will fight it. He has resources and he's not finished, but the ground has shifted." "Good," Clara said. Marsh looked at her and then at Elias, who was standing by the stove with his coffee. "You two make a good team," Marsh said. It was entirely matter of fact. Clara looked at Elias. Elias looked at her. "We're getting there," she said, and Elias set down his coffee cup and almost, not quite, but almost smiled in a way that was just for her. After Marsh left to pack his things, Clara and Elias were alone in the kitchen. The documents were filed. The lawyer was engaged. Roy Decker had crossed to their side of the line. Frank was coming back with a surveyor within the week. For the first time in more than a month, the pressure had eased. Not lifted, not gone, but eased. Clara poured the last of the coffee into her cup and leaned against the counter and looked at the man sitting at her kitchen table. The man who had arrived with a suitcase and a carpenter's hands and a letter she had nearly forgotten, and felt something settle inside her that had not been settled in a very long time. "You said you loved me," she said. Elias looked up. "I did," he said. "I've been thinking about it." "I noticed. I'm not ready to say the same thing back," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that." "All right," he said. "But I'm not—" She stopped, chose carefully. "I'm not going to say it. Does that make sense?" He looked at her. "It makes complete sense," he said. "I need more time," she said. "Not because I don't trust you. Not because I don't—" She stopped again, breathed. "Not because what you said didn't matter to me. But because the last time I loved someone and lost him, it took me 4 years just to stop feeling like the ground was gone. And I'm not willing to say it until I can say it without fear." "Clara," Elias said. "Yes. I came 2,000 miles on the strength of a letter," he said. "I can wait until the ground feels solid." The kitchen was warm. Outside Montana was cold and complicated, and not done with either of them yet. But inside at this table, with this man, Clara Whitmore felt something she had not felt in 4 years. She felt like the ground was coming back. Not solid yet, but coming. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Edwin Marsh filed in Helena on a Thursday. By Saturday, word had come back that the Territorial Attorney General's office had accepted the formal complaint against Western Progress Development for review. By Monday, a notice had been issued requiring Gerald Croft's company to suspend all active claims in the Southern Valley pending investigation. Clara read the notice 3 times, standing at the kitchen table. Then she sat down. Then she read it a 4th time. "It's not over," Marsh had written in his accompanying letter. "Croft will appeal the suspension, and he has the resources to drag this out. But the ground has shifted fundamentally. With Roy Decker's documents establishing the direct railroad connection, the Attorney General cannot ignore the pattern of acquisition misconduct across 3 counties. The boundary argument will be heard, but Frank's resurvey combined with Daniel's original documentation makes their position extremely difficult to sustain. I expect a resolution within 90 days, possibly fewer." Clara put the letter down. Elias was watching her from across the table. "What does it say?" he asked. "It says we're winning," she said. "Not won. Winning." "That's enough for today," he said. "It is," she agreed. And for a moment, they simply sat with it. The first real breath either of them had taken in 6 weeks, the first morning that did not begin with the specific tension of people waiting for the next attack. The fire in the stove, the cold outside, the ranch around them, still standing still theirs. Still hers. Clara picked up her coffee cup and held it with both hands and let herself feel something she had been rationing very carefully for weeks. Relief. Just that. Plain, unadorned relief. It lasted about 4 minutes. Then her mind moved to the next thing. The way her mind always moved, because 4 years of running a 140-acre ranch alone had wired her for forward motion as a survival mechanism. 90 days to resolution. Frank's surveyor had confirmed the boundary clean, unambiguous, exactly what Daniel's original documents showed. Roy Decker's statement was on record. Peter Hollis's statement was on record. Marsh was good, and he was thorough, and he was working. But Croft was not done. She knew that the way she knew weather coming, not from any single sign, but from the accumulated reading of everything around her. "He's going to do something before the appeal is heard," she said. Elias set his cup down. "What makes you think so?" "Because men like Croft don't wait for a court to tell them the answer," she said. "They look for another lever, something outside the legal process, something that doesn't leave the same kind of paper trail." "What's left?" Elias said. "He's lost Roy. He's lost Peter Hollis. Marsh has his internal documents. The Attorney General is involved." "He still has Harris," Clara said. "The intermediary who hired Peter. We have a description and a first name. We don't have a statement from him, and Croft knows that." Elias was quiet for a moment. What could Harris do at this point? "I don't know," Clara said. "That's what worries me." She was not wrong. Harris showed up 2 days later. Not at the ranch, Not at Harlan's feed, not at the postal exchange, not anywhere in the valley that Clara would have seen him. He showed up at the boarding house in town where Frank's surveyor, a man named Claude Biggs, had been staying for the past week, while he completed his work on the southwestern corner boundary. Biggs came to the ranch the following morning with a tight expression and a story that he told standing in the doorway of the barn because he was apparently too agitated to come inside. "A man came to my room last night," Biggs said. "Said his name was Harris. Said he was aware that I'd been hired to resurvey the Whitmore boundary, and that he wanted to discuss my findings before I filed them." Clara felt her jaw tighten. "What did he offer you?" she asked. Biggs looked uncomfortable. $200, he said, to note an ambiguity in the southwestern corner that wasn't there in reality. A small one. Just enough to give Croft's legal team something to argue about. He paused. He said it wouldn't change the outcome. He said it was just creating room for negotiation. "What did you tell him?" Elias asked. "I told him I would think about it," Biggs said. "Then I sat in my room for 4 hours and didn't sleep, and came here at 6 in the morning because Frank Whitmore told me you were a woman who played straight. And I've been in this territory long enough to know that $200 from a man like that costs considerably more than $200 eventually." "You did the right thing," Clara said. "I know that now," Biggs said. "I'd like to feel better about it." "File the survey today," Clara said. "Exactly as the findings are. Don't change a word." "Already planning to," Biggs said. "I just need you to know what happened, in case it matters." "It matters," Clara said. "Write down exactly what Harris said to you, what he offered and when. Date it. Sign it." "You want another statement," Biggs said. "I want the complete picture," Clara said. "So when Marsh walks into that hearing, there is nothing Croft's legal team can throw at him that we haven't already documented." Biggs wrote the statement at her kitchen table. He filed the survey the same afternoon. Clara sent an express letter to Marsh in Helena that evening, detailing Harris's approach to Biggs, the offer made, and the additional signed statement. Marsh's response came back in 4 days. It was 3 sentences long. "The attempted bribery of your surveyor is exactly what we needed. I am adding it to the complaint. Gerald Croft is out of moves." Clara read it to Elias at supper. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is it strange that I'm almost sorry it's ending?" She looked at him. "The fight," she said. "The fight is not something I'll miss," he said. "But the—" He searched for the right word. "We have been very much in each other's company for the past 6 weeks, urgently in each other's company, and I find that I don't know what it looks like when the urgency is gone." Clara looked at her plate. She understood exactly what he meant. Crisis she had learned in 4 years of managing a ranch alone had a way of making everything simple. When there was a fence down, or a storm coming, or a water system failing, the priorities arranged themselves clearly, and you simply moved. It was the quiet that complicated things. The ordinary days when nothing required you to be decisive, when you had to sit with what you actually felt, instead of what you needed to do. "I think," she said carefully, "that it looks like 2 people figuring out something new." "New," he said. "You told me you came here because you believed what comes after loss can still be real," she said. "Not a replacement, something new." "I remember." "I think that's still true," she said. "I think the fight I think it showed us who we are when things are hard. The question is who we are when things are not hard." Elias looked at her. "I'm the same either way," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I'm counting on." The words landed between them, and neither of them picked them up right away, because some words need a moment of air around them before they can breathe properly. And in that moment, with the stove warm and the winter pressing the windows and the ranch standing firm around them, Clara Whitmore understood something she had been circling for 2 months, without being able to get close enough to name. She was not afraid of him anymore. Not afraid of what she felt. Not afraid of the future of it. The fear was still there somewhere in the deep place where you put things that life has taught you to be careful about. But it had stopped running the show. Something else was running the show now. The formal hearing on the Western Progress Development complaint was scheduled for the first week of February in Missoula before Judge Oliver Crew. Marsh had filed the motion to have Crew recused based on his railroad investment. The motion was denied, which Marsh had expected, and which he handled by ensuring that every piece of their documentation was so thoroughly airtight that Crew's investment made no practical difference to the outcome. Clara and Frank rode to Missoula. Elias came. She had not asked him to. She had not needed to. He had simply appeared the morning they were leaving with his coat on and his horse saddled, and Clara had looked at him for exactly 1 second before she turned and mounted, and they rode together. The hearing lasted 2 days. On the first day, Marsh presented the water rights documentation. Daniel's original survey corroborated by Biggs's independent resurvey, Peter Hollis's statement, Roy Decker's 3 years of internal correspondence with Croft's company, and the documented pattern of acquisition misconduct across Jefferson County and Deer Lodge. On the second day, Croft's legal team presented their boundary argument, their claim of legitimate business purpose, and their characterization of the Harris incident as an unauthorized action by a contractor acting outside his mandate. Judge Crew asked 17 questions. Clara counted them because she needed something to do with her hands and her mind during the hours of legal argument that she was not permitted to speak during. On the afternoon of the second day, Crew recessed. He came back in 40 minutes. He ruled in Clara's favor on every point. The boundary claim was dismissed. The water rights survey was voided. Western Progress Development's acquisition activity in the Southern Valley was permanently enjoined, pending the Attorney General's separate investigation into the misconduct complaint. And Gerald Croft was formally referred to the Territorial Attorney General for the actions documented in Deer Lodge and Jefferson County. Marsh shook Clara's hand outside the courthouse. Croft will likely settle with the Attorney General, he said. He won't risk a full criminal investigation. Bessie Crane may have recourse now. I'll be reaching out to her directly. Good, Clara said. Your ranch is secure, Marsh said. The water rights are clear. No one is going to bother you again. Clara stood in the cold Missoula air and felt the weight she had been carrying for 6 weeks lift off her in a single clean motion, the way a load comes off a pack horse at the end of a long trail, suddenly completely with the specific physical sensation of being lighter than you remembered being. Frank put his arm around her shoulders briefly and said, Daniel would be pleased. He'd be furious it ever got this far, Clara said. That too, Frank agreed. She turned to find Elias. He was 3 steps behind her where he had been for 2 days, close enough to be present, far enough back to give her room. Not in front, not managing her experience, just there. She walked to him. She stood in front of him on the steps of the Missoula courthouse in February, with her breath visible in the cold air, and the case won, and the ranch saved, and 4 years of surviving alone behind her, and something she was not afraid of anymore standing right in front of her. It's done, she said. Yes, he said. I want to go home, she said. Yes, he said. I'd like you to come with me. He looked at her, not surprised, not triumphant, just present and careful and steady in the way she had come to understand was simply the fabric of who he was. I'm already packed, he said. And Clara did something she had not planned to do on the steps of a courthouse in Missoula. She laughed. A real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind that comes from somewhere below the chest and arrives without apology. And Elias smiled, the full version, the one she had been seeing pieces of for 2 months, but not the whole of until now. And it rearranged something in her chest permanently. They rode home. Spring came to Montana the way it always did. Not gently, not all at once, but in argument with the winter advancing and retreating, giving ground and taking it back. Until one morning, you woke up and the light was different and you understood that the season had finally won. Clara woke to that morning in late March. She lay still for a moment and listened. The house was not quiet. From the direction of the barn, she could hear the particular sound of someone working, even unhurried, familiar now in the way that sounds become familiar, when they have been part of your mornings long enough to feel like your own heartbeat. She got up. She made coffee. She made enough for two without thinking about it, without noting that she was doing it, because it had been so long since she had done anything else. Elias came through the kitchen door at 6:30, with mud on his boots, and the specific expression of a man who has been thinking about something for a while and has decided to say it. "Good morning," Clara said. "Good morning." He sat down. He took the coffee she set in front of him. He held it and looked at the table for a moment. "Say whatever you're going to say," Clara said. "You've been composing it since yesterday." "Since Tuesday," he said. "That's 4 days. It took some arranging." He looked up. "I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it properly, not the way I said what I said in November, which was honest, but badly timed and not arranged at all." Clara set her cup down. "All right," she said. "I know what I said I came here for," Elias said. "I know I came with a letter and a suitcase and an intention that looked from the outside like a man arriving with a plan. But I want you to understand what I actually found." He looked at her steadily. "I found a woman who runs a 140-acre ranch with the kind of competence and integrity that most men I've known would not be capable of. I found a woman who was afraid and did not let that fear make her decisions. I found a woman who was willing to trust slowly and correctly, which is the only kind of trusting worth doing." He paused. "I found someone who made me feel like a man who had something to offer again, instead of a man who had outlived the best version of himself." Clara was very still. "Elias!" "I'm not finished," he said. "I want to marry you, not because of a letter, not because I came 2,000 miles and it would be embarrassing not to, not because you need someone here and I happen to be available." He held her gaze. "Because I love you, specifically and clearly, and without any confusion about what I mean. Because every morning that I wake up on this property and know you're in this house, I understand what the word home means, in a way I had stopped believing I would ever understand again." The kitchen was completely still. Outside, the spring light was changing by the minute. Clara looked at the man across her kitchen table. The man who had shown up with a suitcase on a November afternoon and fixed her fences and her water trough and her chicken coop roof and gone out in a blizzard to protect her creek and sat across from Roy Decker and Gerald Croft without flinching and ridden to Missoula and waited 3 steps behind her on the courthouse steps because she needed room and she felt the last of the fear go. Not because it was gone completely. Not because loving someone after loss was a thing that ever became simple or unscared. But because she understood now what she had not understood when she wrote that letter 14 months ago, what she had not had words for, what she had been moving toward for every one of the 140 days since a man from Ohio knocked on her door. She understood that the second chance was not a replacement for what she had lost. It was something entirely its own. Something that Daniel in the best version of himself would have wanted for her. Something that Ruth would have recognized and been glad about. Something that was not made lesser by what had come before, but was shaped by it, informed by it, honest about it, built with the full knowledge that grief is not something you leave behind, but something you carry into the life that comes next, and that the right person does not ask you to put it down. They carry it with you. "Yes," Clara said. Elias looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Yes," she said again. "I'll marry you." He breathed. Just that, a single exhale, deep and complete, the breath of someone who has been waiting for an answer and can finally let go of the waiting. "I love you," Clara said. "I should have said it sooner, but I needed to be sure I could say it without the fear saying it for me." "You said it now," he said. "I said it now." She agreed. He reached across the table and took her hand. Not urgently, not dramatically. Simply took her hand the way you hold on to something real, the way you hold the thing you have been traveling toward for a very long time. They sat like that for a while. The coffee went slightly cold. Neither of them moved to heat it. Cool. They married in April on a Saturday in the small valley church that Clara had attended most of her adult life, and that she had sat in alone for 4 years, feeling the empty space beside her on the pew. Frank stood on Elias's side. Margaret Harlan stood on Clara's. The church was fuller than she had expected. Most of the valley had come, including people she had not expected, including Harold Harlan, who cried openly and denied it afterward, and Bill Crane, who had appointed himself her protector for 4 years without once asking what she wanted, and who sat in the back row with an expression that was part relief and part something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Even Roy Decker came. He sat near the back with his hat on his knees and his face arranged into something quieter and more honest than she was used to seeing on it, and when Clara caught his eye as she walked past, she nodded once and he nodded once back. And that was as much forgiveness as she had available, and as much as either of them needed in that moment. Edwin Marsh sent a letter. It arrived the morning of the wedding, which she read at the kitchen table, while Elias was at the cabin getting dressed, because some habits die hard, and some mornings still needed to be hers alone. Marsh wrote that the Attorney General's investigation had resulted in Gerald Croft agreeing to a settlement that included restitution payments to 3 Valley properties, including Bessie Crane's family, and a permanent bar from operating land acquisition companies in Montana Territory. She put the letter in the wooden box. The box was full now. She closed it and carried it to the shelf and set it above the kitchen window where it had always lived, and thought, this is what a life looks like. Documents and letters and agreements and grief and love and second chances, all pressed together in a space too small to hold them, and somehow holding them anyway. The wedding was simple. They said what needed to be said. The Reverend asked if she took this man, and she said yes in a voice that was clear and steady, and not afraid, and Elias's hand was warm around hers. And she did not look at the empty pew where Daniel used to sit, because she understood that Daniel was not absent from this day. He was part of everything that had made her capable of this day. He was in the ranch that stood because she had fought for it. He was in the 4 years of competence and grief and survival that had made her the woman who could write a letter to a stranger and mean every word of it. He was in the empty chair she had moved 6 inches to the left on a November morning to make room for someone new. He was not gone. He was woven in. And Elias understood that. He had always understood it. That was why she trusted him with it. After the ceremony, after the small reception in the church hall with Margaret Harlan's extraordinary pie and Frank's terrible attempt at a toast that made everyone laugh anyway, they rode home together in the late afternoon light. They rode side by side, not one behind the other. Beside, when they came through the ranch gate, her gate, their gate, the gate with the new hinges Elias had installed on his 3rd day on the property, Clara stopped her horse and looked at the ranch spread before her. The fences stood clean and strong. The barn was solid. The chicken coop roof was tight. The south pasture ran all the way to the creek with the water flowing free and clear under the April sky. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked. "I'm thinking about a letter I wrote in 9 minutes on a cold night in September," she said. "And how embarrassed I was the moment I sent it." "Are you still embarrassed?" he asked. Clara looked at her ranch, at the fences he had walked before she trusted him with the livestock, at the cabin where he had slept for 6 weeks and never asked for more than she was ready to give, at the kitchen table where they had spread documents and maps and plans and drunk 10,000 cups of coffee and told each other the truth when it would have been easier not to. "No," she said. "Good," he said. They rode to the barn. They put the horses up together. They went inside. And that evening at the kitchen table where a chair had sat empty for 4 years, 2 people who had survived the worst things their lives had handed them sat across from each other and ate supper and talked about spring planting and the south pasture drainage and whether the barn needed a new coat of paint before summer. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that only sound ordinary from the outside because from the inside they are the whole substance of a life, the texture of it, the weight of it, the specific daily realness of choosing to be with someone and finding every morning that the choice still holds. Clara looked at Elias across the table. He looked back at her. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "I was just looking." He held her gaze for a moment. "All right," he said, and went back to his supper. And Clara thought, "This is it. This is the thing. Not the grand gesture or the dramatic rescue or the moment of clarity that arrives like lightning. This man, this table this evening, this life that they were building one ordinary day at a time, from the honest and unglamorous and completely irreplaceable materials of two people who had decided to stop being afraid and start being home." That winter, when the first snow came back to Montana territory, it found the Whitmore Ranch. Carter Ranch. Now Clara. Carter, though she kept Whitmore in the deed because Daniel had earned his place in it, standing as it had always stood. Solid, worked alive with the accumulated labor of people who had given everything they had to the land and the life and each other. Inside the kitchen was warm. The stove burned steady. The wooden box sat above the window with its full cargo of documents and letters, and the deed and the photograph of a woman named Ruth who had sung badly without apology, and somewhere in there at the very bottom, a letter written in 9 minutes on a cold night by a woman who had been too embarrassed to believe anyone would answer. Someone had answered. He was at the table. He was home. And on the Montana frontier in the autumn of 1887, a widow had written a letter she nearly regretted, and a man had read it in a boarding house in Ohio and understood with the quiet certainty of someone who has been lost long enough to recognize a direction when he sees one that he was going west. He rode west to marry a widow. What he found was not what either of them expected. What they found was better, truer, harder, more real and more lasting than anything a letter could have promised. What they found was each other. And that was the beginning of everything worth keeping.